Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, and the Designing Hollywood podcast is dedicated to all things movies, the movie industry, and its talented professionals. I gotta say, I'm very excited for our next guest. She is an English costume designer. She is a multiple Academy Award winner. She won Best Costume Design in 1986 for a movie that I swear to God gets better with age, A Room with a View. She won another Academy Award for the superlative costumes that also were shiny and chrome for Mad Max Fury Road. I mean, unbelievable. And she's been nominated 10 times. She's worked with many directors over the last, well, her career is as a who's who of incredibly talented filmmakers. You know, other movies like, I don't know, The King's Speech, perhaps another Academy Award winner. She's most recently unbelievable work in Disney's Cruella. It's just amazing. And that's not her natural milieu. Costume design itself was not a part of her plan. A graduate in set design from London's Central School of Art and Design, Jenny Beavan, now 70, took an unpaid job designing costumes for a small Merchant Ivory production, a project that led to decades of work designing for director James Ivory. Fashion is more alien still, and she's going to talk all about it. And so without further ado, it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce the very talented Jenny Beavan to Designing Hollywood podcast. Jenny, thank you so much for being here. I think to start out, what a crazy journey you seem to have had. How did that happen? How did you find yourself in costume design?
Well, as you so rightly said, I definitely wanted to be a set designer. I loved theatre when I was a child. We had a wonderful grandfather who loved Shakespeare and would give us sixpence if we could tell him where a quote from Shakespeare came from. And that sixpence was a lot of money in the 50s. So I got very keen on Shakespeare. And he took me to see my first Shakespeare, which was Twelfth Night with Dorothy Tootin at the Old Witch Theatre in London. And I just fell in love. I didn't know what I wanted to be, but I had to be in that world. And later on, I got involved with lots of sort of semi-professional opera theatre companies, student stuff. Even when I was still at school, I used to, I'm afraid, play truant and go off and paint scenery, make coffee, do the laundry, anything to be part of a production. And that really was where I wanted to be. And then I went on to the Central School of Art and Design, as you said. And my head of department was Ralph Coltai, a phenomenal theatre designer at the peak of his career, but very much a set designer, who told me, darling, he said, he was German, Hungarian German, you know, you are really quite good at set design. Don't you worry about the costumes. You always get someone else to do them. And of course, I believed him, and I love doing sets. I love creating the world on a stage for people to inhabit. And I love the storytelling part of it. Anyway, as again you said, I got to know Merchant Ivory by a different route. My mother was extremely alternative, and she sent us to a Dalcroze eurythmic class, which is basically music and movement, no ordinary ballet for her daughters. And I met a boy called, and Nick Young went on to, in fact, the South Bank show as a commissioning editor. But en route, he'd been at Westminster School, and his study mate, Richard McCrory's father, had written a book about the first Afghan war and wanted to make it into a film, and somehow or other got to know Jim and Ismail, Merchant and Ivory. Richard and Nick got to work on any films they then did in London, like Autobiography of a Princess, and if they needed a bit of extra help, I pitched along as well. So I kind of knew them from late school, you know, my late teens. But when Nick went to the South Bank show, he commissioned a film called Hullabaloo over Bonnie and George's pictures. And asked me if I could help out because Dame Peggy Ashcroft was in it. She needed some clothes. She was a mad English bohemian art director travelling overland to see a legendary collection of miniature paintings in Jodhpur in Rajasthan in India. And she needed, obviously, a bit of help to put a wardrobe together, or someone had to, and they needed a few also for 20s bits for a flashback. So I trotted off to see Dame Peggy, and on my second visit, she said, "My dear," she said, "we're getting on quite well. Now," she said, "I'm a little nervous about going to India, but they have given me a first-class air ticket.
Sure.
If I change economy is, will you come with me? So the next thing was I was on a plane to India with Peggy Ashcroft, and then the minute I arrived, they were a little surprised to see me, but I was put to work. Crowd collected, I did props, I did looked after Dame Peggy and her wig, her clothes, I helped on anything that was going, and acted in it. Not, again, my natural milieu.
Now, wait, I gotta stop you right there. You acted in it?
We were in the middle of nowhere, Rajasthan. Jennifer Kendall was supposed to be the Scottish governess because they'd done the wonderful film Shakespeare Waller with the Kendall family. Jennifer couldn't come up, and they were stuck for somebody. So I was coached by Peggy Ashcroft to do the poem O Whaley Whaley up the bank and Whaley Whaley down the brae, and something my love did lichtly lee, with a small child. And then I had to play the piano with a small child on my lap. I got through it. I'm still in the film, and I just became part of the Merchant Ivory family because they were phenomenally loyal. So the next film they did in England, well, the next film they were setting up was actually The Europeans. And they went to a costume designer called Judy Moorcroft, who they either knew or had worked with before. And poor Judy was just told, this is Jenny, she will be your assistant. And like in a day, I became a costume designer and not, or assistant, of course, costume designer, and not a set designer in theatre, because I just started and it just continued. And it's just one of those weird things, something I'd never... We did costumes when we did our models and sets for the Central, and costumes when I was doing sets, but it wasn't as all-consuming as this making the world. It's all the same job, you're storytelling. But I just did it, and I don't know why, but I just stayed doing it, and I learned to, I learned on the job, really.
Well, I noticed your credits in the early 80s, before Room with a View, you worked on a lot of, things like The Pirates of Penzance, which is funny when I saw that because I was in it when I was in grade school. I played Major General Stanley. And you did a lot of you did the HMS Pinafore too. And so was there a lot of British, this was all for British television?
That was another thing. I suddenly got asked to go to the BBC as a holiday relief trainee assistant designer. In the old days of the BBC, they had a costume department in-house. Now it's all freelancers. And it was a great training ground, but how I got involved, I really can't remember because we are talking a very long time ago. And as you pointed out, not in my first flush of youth. Anyway, I was at the BBC, and while I was there, doing television, obviously, just as an assistant, I was suddenly rung up and asked, and I think it was because I'd known someone in my days of semi-professional opera, when I could drive and I had use of a car very young, and I used to be terribly handy for picking up props and what have you. A friend, I got to know a really lovely guy called Vic, and he got involved with this opera thing. It was Brent Walker, and they wanted to do all the Gilbert and Sullivan operas. And so I got rung up, and I thought, oh, this sounds wonderful. So I left the BBC and went to do it. And the first 5, which includes, I'm pretty sure, Parrots, Gondoliers, was a week to rehearse and a week to record on television cameras at Twickenham Studios. We literally had a week to pull the thing together, fit the actors, do whatever. The main singers sang, the principal singers sang live. The crowd were, or the chorus as they're called, were pre-recorded. How we did it, in 10 weeks we did 5 operas. And, again, baptism by fire, but that's kind of been the story of my life. Because when I was 21, I did Carmen at Covent Garden, again, completely taking over because someone else fell out. And I was literally 21, and I did 4 sets and 400 costumes. So I've sort of been primed to do things rather last minute since I first started in this job.
Well, what I'm also curious about is one of the things that I've always been fascinated by, and I said this on the last podcast, that some of the most important hires on a film, I think, are hair, makeup, and costume design. Because what you want is your actors need to know when they step out onto the proscenium of the stage or onto that set that they look good. They need to feel their character. They're wearing their character around them. They need to love their costumes. They need to love their makeup. They need to love their hair, because then if they do, they don't think about it. They can concentrate on their performance. And I'm curious, as you started, like you said, trial by fire, were you developing your own sort of philosophy of how this goes now that I'm starting to dress people and working with actors? And, talent can be, you can have a synergistic relationship with them. How did you develop sort of, I guess, your personal style, or were you developing one? Was it different on every project? And what's it like for you working with an actor? And I want to ask a follow-up question to that, but I guess we'll start with the actors first.
I hope I don't have a style, in that I do try and take each film project, whatever, exactly as it comes and be fresh about it. I don't want people to look at it and say, that's a Jenny Beavan costume show. I'm sure I do have a style, but I really don't want that to be part of the work I do. My work is storytelling, and I think I got there by watching very closely Judy Moorcroft, John Bright at Cosprop, who taught me more and became a co-designer with me when I started out, and just working with him and watching, listening, learning. And I think I probably naturally got a reasonably gentle personality in terms of not wanting to impose. I listen to actors. That's what I'm trying to say. I've always been really interested in their point of view, their way of thinking about the character. Some of them don't have an opinion. They want me to do it for them. A lot of them really have a strong vision in their head of how they feel. And you're absolutely right again about saying when they hit the set, they should feel so confident they shouldn't even think about it. They should just feel supported by what they're wearing.
Well, to extend to that, obviously, costume design works with production design. Also, the director of photography, or I don't know if do you call them DOPs in Britain or just DPs like we call them in America?
DOPs, yeah.
Well, one of the things about, I think, costume design as well is it has to work with the rest of the film, and you don't want your costumes clashing with, say, the art direction. And when you come to something like Cruella, I mean, my God, the costumes front and center. First of all, it's a movie about fashion design, but the creations that you came up with are just stunning to look at. But I'm curious, when you're working with a director of photography, a production designer, the entire art department, do you also then work synergistically with the art department, with the production designer? And for you, where does your process begin? Does it begin with, say, the script, or does it begin with the director's vision, or does it begin with the cast itself?
Okay, so first bit, yes, absolutely, with the art department and everybody. It's terribly important we all know what everyone else is doing. So the art department are normally on first. Luckily for Cruella, we were all at Shepperton in the Gainsborough building, so we were all within one space in terms of being able to nip upstairs and see what they were doing and what their boards were for a certain scene in case we wanted to do. We had a lot of talk about colour and, making the colours work and giving each ball, for instance, a colour code, or obviously one says it's black and white and one is a Cruella, another black and white because it's a lot of Cruellas, but particularly the 18th century ball, which was deliberately pastel 60s feel about it. We had a lot of talk, and they're fabulous, Fiona and Alice, the set decorator. I mean, we talked all the time. And with Nadia Stacey, of course, there was huge amounts. And we were all at Shepperton, so it was great. We were in physical space. My start is obviously the script, because that's what I read before I agree to, see the director.
Sure.
That's normally the way it works. Got that in your head. And then the director's vision, and then the director's vision with the script, and those two go hand in hand. I'm a terrific list maker. I pull lists from the script by hand. I've never got the hang of doing it by typing. I'm not bad at typing now, but, I do it all by hand. Other people use all these marvellous programs, which they can use, but I can't. And by just pulling the characters, I'm thinking about it. At the same time I'm doing research, I like to have it all, and I do it on mood boards. I personally don't actually believe in drawing costumes because they're two-dimensional and they don't have body language. But people love them, so normally we do some, but often after I've done it, either on the stand or on the body, so they're drawn from, what we've achieved. And it's a slow building process. I learned very early on to do things in bite-sized chunks. Don't try and do the whole thing at once. You kind of need an overall vision, but you don't actually, you go in schedule order. Otherwise, you'd be overwhelmed by something like Cruella. And actually, as you work on it, you learn more and more, and you will change your ideas as you understand the characters better. And you also work, as in Cruella's case, with the most phenomenal team ever, who brought a lot to it. So unlike a modern film where you would go shopping and look at, obviously you might make stuff, but you would also look in shops. People were making, I would sort of set them up with mood boards and ideas and stuff and loads of fabric, and often bought the fabric myself because I love feeling fabric. And as you do it and you're thinking about, it's just, you can't just sit at a desk and look at, fashion plates or something.
Sure.
You've got to get out. In vintage markets, in fabric stores, on the streets, just looking at people, and remembering the 70s, which I hate to tell you I do quite well.
The clothes, of course. Come on.
Yeah. I couldn't afford much, but because I was in theatre still at that point.
Sure.
Weren't very well paid in theatre. But, I do remember a lot about it. I was also never quite the right shape to wear. 70s was very skinny, but I did have some wonderful long pointed collar shirts, and that thing where you wore a short T-shirt with a sort of voluminous blouse and loons, which were very skinny trousers that then swept out over high platform boots, which actually made my legs look an almost normal length, which were great. But that's sort of, I remember it.
Well, I have to ask you, so you start on this and you spend the early 80s working on a lot of these BBC programs, but then when you get to A Room with a View, that was 85. And suddenly you're nominated for an Academy Award. Like, I would say pretty early on, right? I mean, and I was just curious because I'd be remiss to ask you, because I'd want to know, what was it like getting nominated for an Academy Award? Suddenly you're in awards contention, and you're now working at the very highest level of the industry fairly early on in your costume career. How was that?
Well, that was the luck of getting to know Merchant Ivory. So go back to my mother at the age of me being 3, sending me to Dark Rose Eurythmics, and I met Nick Young. If I hadn't met Nick Young and therefore met Merchant Ivory, and obviously proved that I was willing to do anything, almost anything, obviously, to work, and loved it, I probably wouldn't have been there. I just think there was something extraordinary and serendipitous that happened. I have no idea what I did right in a former life, but I was definitely given a lot of luck. And it's once you've had the luck, you then have to obviously work on the luck. You can't just take it for granted. But I think that's why I was there, because Merchant Ivory hit a peak of really fine filmmaking that people obviously at that point, because sometimes you can make a wonderful film, but nobody actually wants to see it. They want more action or whatever. But it hit a moment, and the film was a success, and so we were a success because we were only part of the whole.
Well, after that, in the wake of Room with a View, your credits, I mean, to look at what you've done, everything from Maurice, White Fang, Howard's End, Swing Kids, The Remains of the Day, Jefferson in Paris, Sense and Sensibility, Amen, Jane Eyre, Ever After, Anna and the King, Gosford Park, my God. I mean, and this is just a fraction of what you worked on. I mean, I would think that you suddenly became if someone was making a romantic period piece, or you were the go-to person. There was probably nobody better in the world. I mean, I look at these credits of yours, and I hope I'm not embarrassing you, but man, did you work on some classic films, and with so many great people. And what was that like? I mean, suddenly you're catapulted. You're at the top of your game now, and you're working. And I mean, Merchant Ivory only got better and better. Howard's End, and what? I mean, that time. Did you ever stop and have to pinch yourself and go, wait a minute? Like you said, I must have done something in another life. But the meteoric rise, was it a meteoric rise? Or maybe I'm just, as a film fan, I can't not look at your list of credits sort of in awe, to be honest. And yet, you did specialize in period pieces, a lot of that. I mean, Swing Kids, which is, I think, a favorite of people. It's not a movie that people talk about a lot, but I think it's when people bring it up, they're like, oh, I love Swing Kids, and what was that like?
I don't think I felt what you felt for me. I was basically a working, not single parent, but I was definitely the major wage earner. And, Merchant Ivory didn't pay very well. It was wonderful kudos, but, it wonderful. But Ismail really felt if he fed you, he really didn't need to pay you, and so I really had to keep working. And I was, age. I had child, and it was and a nanny to pay so I could do the work. So I had to earn some money. And so I gratefully took every job sent my way. And to be honest, I didn't choose to stick with period costume. It was just that obviously having set up that I was reasonably good at it.
Right.
And working Bright, the person of all, John Bright, who owns Cosbrook, in the best costume house in the world, who was absolutely my mentor, my teacher. He's more knowledgeable about period clothing in general and history and all the rest of it than most people, and has an incredible collection. So I was learning from him all the time, and we were doing things together. So it was really hard work. I'm trying to keep a family, and everything, which obviously did fall apart in the end. But it was tough, but obviously I did enjoy it, and yes, I did get success and acknowledgement. But it was funny. I guess at the time I didn't really think about it a lot. I just got on with the next. Each next job was as challenging, even if it was another Jane Austen. They're totally different stories. You approach them differently. You've got totally different actors in them. So each one was a complete challenge, absolutely in its own way. So I used to sort of, struggle along. But yeah, I mean, it has got easier as I've got older, as I've learned more, because I think I'm better at how to approach the problem. Not necessarily how to solve it, but I'm definitely better at how to approach the problem.
Well, it's interesting to me also, you started working with, some legendary directors as well. I mean, Merchant Ivory, but then you got to work with someone like Brian De Palma, on the Black Dahlia. And then you work with the late, unfortunately he passed away this week, Richard Donner, on Timeline. And the Guy Ritchie movies, you worked, the Sherlock Holmes films. And then, of course, to me, the long in gestating development of Fury Road, a movie that they tried for years to get made. It was going to be shot in Australia. Then I think 9/11 happened and it got prevented. And then finally, because George Miller did not give up, you got to go make Fury Road, which, as far as costume design goes, between Fury Road and Cruella, I can't imagine having more fun in terms of costume design. But as you move forward, you never rested on your laurels. You just kept working on bigger and bigger projects, and it's incredible looking at your credits. And was there ever a moment when you actually did realize, well, you know what, I'm pretty damn good at this? Did you ever finally realize just how amazing what you do is?
No, I honestly, because I'm actually doing a follow-up to Fury Road now, Furiosa, the new Mad Max.
Oh, with Anya Taylor-Joy. Really
doing a sequel. I know there's sort of vague talk if you read IMDb about another Cruella. And I think, however, I just keep thinking, how the hell did I manage to pull that off? Either of them. That time around. So having to do them again is it's sort of wonderful. Furiosa because I absolutely love George Miller and he is so interesting to work for. But of course, we're doing it via Zoom with Australia. I've got a workroom in Sydney run by the fabulous Mel Dykes, who was supervisor on Fury Road. So she's absolutely knows and she was with them since Thunderdome. So she's completely part of that family, Kennedy Miller Mitchell, just like the Merchant Ivory, incredibly loyal. And they're using, because I don't think it's a spoiler alert, but we are using some of the characters from Fury Road, so they will look the same. But I honestly think the minute I do think I'm really good at this, whatever it is I do, is the moment to stop, because I think I'd get smug or something, which would be shocking. But I really, I definitely feel more at ease in how to delegate, how to run, big department, and how to approach the whole problem and how to absolutely not be scared of, anymore of saying, I really don't know what this should look like. I can't tell from the script. I can't tell from what you want. Could you help, please? And also letting my crew have really great ideas and not feeling I have to be the one that thinks of everything because it's got to be me, me, me. I love the idea that, within the Cruella team, a lot of them came up with some of those extraordinary ideas from, Ian Wallace always wanted to make a Charles James Tree dress, so he was blooming well going to have a go at it, and then if we didn't like it, we wouldn't like it, but actually it was brilliant, the red dress, and you could vaguely believe it was made out of strips of the fabric of the dress she found in the vintage store. So, and Dom Young just came up with incredible sharp tailoring, and Kirsten with her, I fed them the ideas, and absolutely fed them mood boards, fed them thoughts, hung around their cutting tables, chatting and saying what I thought. But a lot of them came up with amazing things like, oh my God, that's brilliant. Yeah, come on, that's in. And when you're doing something at that speed, being really aware of how brilliant your crew is and celebrating them and thanking them is part of how it works.
Now, to delve into, obviously, Cruella is currently, it's been in theaters and it's on Disney Plus now. To delve into that a little bit, I'm curious, the movie obviously is centered in the 70s, but did you take inspiration from the previous films, such as, of course, Glenn Close's performance, and then go back all the way to the animated 101 Dalmatians? I suppose you'd have to look at those things, but was that a starting point, or did you want to make it entirely original, a whole different approach?
Well, because it's an origin story, I think vaguely you have to believe at the end she might become Glenn Close in about 15 years, whatever, or 20 years. But that really wasn't the point. The only thing, I looked once at the animation and once at the Glenn Close. I knew Anthony Powell really well, the costume designer, the absolutely brilliant costume designer, and I was so longing to show him what I was doing, but sadly he got ill, and then I never could show him what I was doing. Basically, I then put them out of my mind because I think we just had to go with the script and Craig Gillespie's thoughts on it, which he's very visual. He'd come up with mood boards and thoughts about it all. And a lot of it was very on the nail. The script was quite clear about a lot of the things. I did not make up that there was a dress that comes out of a dumpster truck. That's all in the script, as is the when she covers the car, that's all in the script. How we realised them, of course, was totally our ideas. But, and the whole transition of her from a child customer, I mean, it doesn't say she customised her uniform, I don't think, but basically, if you read the script, it's clear her journey, and her journey in costume and clothes is clear. And of course, she goes through a lot of things, and all the disguises when they're still pickpocketing and all that, all had to be done. So we did end up with a lot of stuff, but it was very much. It was fun. There were moments of sheer stress, unbelievable stress, but there were moments when I just roared with laughter, especially as Craig used to almost cut it as we went along on his iPhone 6, his iPhone, and just say, And he'd already have cut a sequence, and I mean, it was just bloody brilliant. I don't know why it took all that time to edit, because he was all over it on the basically on the scene.
Well, from what I understand, you came up with 47 different looks for Emma Stone. I can't even imagine. How do you lay that out? Like, was that a puzzle? Did you have to did you have the script up on a wall with like you said, mood boards and pointing to, okay, we're gonna take the viewers, the audience, and Emma Stone herself on a fashion journey? How did you plot all of that out?
That, but without the script. We did it on mood boards, so you had literally every look, seen, one to whatever, and a photograph of her from the fitting, filling in, and then if I hadn't got her in the fitting, I'd do it on the stand, so we could pretty much see everything. And then it was like playing cards. You'd swap them around, and maybe that'd be better there, and should she have got to that point already? Is that a bit sophisticated? Because obviously she starts as a young designer, she develops her style to some extent. I think we cut so fast in the movie, you don't quite see the amount that we did to show a progression, but it's there. And then obviously all the big showstopper numbers are all in there. And yes, it was done literally like, a chart, because it just keeps you safe and you can sleep at night if you kind of know, and you know the ones you're missing, and you know what you've got to think about to fill in those gaps, because you can't. Often there's one that really evades you because you're doing something. The way they've scripted it, it's just, how did she get that? And where's it come from? And, hanging upside down on a wire or something. Oh, God, But anyway, but as you get to know the character more, and you get to know the whole film more, and you're seeing it because you're on set, not much because you're too busy, but, you're seeing it, you begin to be able to fill in the gaps because you understand it all better.
Now, I can only imagine, like, when you develop a working relationship with an actor like Emma Stone, 47 different looks. I can't imagine she wasn't having a good time. And was she involved in the development of any of these different looks? Like, were you working with her to evolve them, or did you just bring them to her after you had already decided on what they were going to be?
She is one of the nicest and easiest actors I've ever worked with. She's a really normal human being, but not a but. She seemed to enjoy having it brought to her. So the very first fitting we did in her house in Los Angeles, we took a car. Luckily, she's got a very handy garage just before you go into the kitchen. So we set up in the garage, backed the car up and set up, and we had God knows how many suitcases of clothes, which we basically put together in England and then added to in New York and in LA and all the wonderful vintage stores there. And I put it together in an order to just start putting clothes on, because that's what I do. In my head, I mean, there's a reason behind each thing, but it's a very organic thing. And as we put stuff on her, she would pose, she would adopt the clothes, she would, and we would be all in her kitchen and just taking photographs. And there were a lot of placeholders. There was a fabulous red dress we got in a ghastly store in the Beverly Centre for about 80, which was just great red, shiny dress, just to show because it had to be red. I don't even know whether it was in the script. I think it wasn't. I think it went through several changes in the script. But anyway, red's so brilliant in a black and white ball, why wouldn't you? Much better than yellow. And or blue, or green. So, it was just watching, seeing, learning from that first session. And out of that, we got the basis, and a lot of it was vintage stuff from the 70s, or looks that seemed appropriate, or, it was just, must have been a good 4 to 5 hours of just on, off. Oh, well, let's add this. So you've got a great pair of trousers, so let's try this top. Hats, why don't we try the cap? The beret, I had all sorts of 70s. The boots. Okay, let's just try the lace-up boots, because, it was all whatever. That was our first thing. But she seemed to enjoy just having it, not being particularly involved. I mean, I think she just trusted us. She seemed to wear real pleasure.
When you are doing a fitting like this and you're working with someone like Emma Stone, when she was putting on these clothes and maybe posing and having fun doing some things, did you see things that you knew could come through in the performance she would bring to the role that would make you actually change the clothes? Like you said, you were adding things as she was doing it. Was there something, and I guess to a larger extent, when you see an actor, when you dress them and they might do something in the clothes that you hadn't seen before, does that ever change your design sense? And you're like, oh, this person's doing something that let me add to this or take this away to play to their strengths. Does that ever happen?
I think it's more, I can't remember that happening, but it well could have, and I don't think it happened on Cruella, but it definitely happens visually. You think, oh God, that's too much, let's just take that off. That doesn't need that. And I mean, there's still things I look at our finished film and think, maybe I shouldn't have done whatever, or maybe I should have done something much simpler. Whatever. I'm not going to say because that would spoil it for people, but I think you'll never stop just thinking, oh God, I wish I had broken that down more, got rid of that stripe, not had those cuffs, whatever. But no, I didn't feel that with her on that, and nor with Emma Thompson, actually. I mean, it just... Mind you, we were going at such speed, you can imagine. We only had 10 weeks to prep the film. And then we did get 6 because Emma Stone hurt her shoulder, which we blessed her for on a daily basis, but hoping she wasn't in too much pain, But anyway, yeah. I don't remember that. But I would adapt to if people asked me to, like said, Jenny, I can't actually do whatever. I'm in these trousers, or, maybe the cuff of the trouser is getting caught in things. Can you help me here? Of course, absolutely. But normally, no, I don't think I changed things. I couldn't see what the performance was going to be. I couldn't get it at all, actually, at the beginning. It took me ages to get my head around it, the script, and it didn't kind of make sense. And I just thought, I'll just keep going, really.
Now, of all these looks, was there one that was a particular favorite of yours, and which one was the most difficult to realize?
Well, I would say my favourite was Wink's rat costume, because the whole performance Wink gives in his rat costume has to be one of the highlights of this movie. But I think my favourite Emma Stone is actually the look she has at the end in that incredible tailored cape coat that Dominic Young made. And I've got a photograph which you haven't got in the movie because we had her up against the staircase with the light behind her, and it's just phenomenal, back and front. And I mean, I sort of love that, and I know that's the one she kind of quite would have liked to have taken home. I'm very fond of the dumpster truck dress because that always had to be the Baroness's 1967 spring collection, which I think it definitely is, and because it sort of puffers along the road. I love the big thing she gets on the car with the wonderful jacket with the shoulders, which you hardly see. I mean, she's in it. And I like a lot of her just simple look at the beginning when she starts just wearing those slightly loose sort of breeches and the boots and the beret, and she's sort of quite a trendy, sparky little young designer. I love that look.
When you saw the film cut together for the first time, I mean, one of the things, there's almost a musical rhythm to the way the costumes work in the film. I mean, you're taking the audience on a journey as much as the rest of the film does, but the fashion, you're waiting as an audience member to see, like, what are they going to come up with next? I can't remember seeing a movie where I was consciously aware of waiting to see the next outfit. And that's part of the milieu of the film, obviously. But was that something conscious, in terms of how a director and a writer want to take an audience on a journey? Was it your intent to sort of take the audience on this journey through fashion?
Well, that is the basis of the story, so absolutely. And as you probably know, fashion is not my milieu. I'm not actually particularly interested in fashion. You won't see a single fashion thing around my house or anything to do with costume. That's just... To use it as storytelling, of course, is completely fascinating. And then getting, of course, I knew who Vivienne Westwood with, McQueen and all these people, but then to delve in and see their activism, their interesting political, and the whole time of the 70s and after the 60s, and this enormous explosion of freedom, and out of the 50s, which I also remember, the sort of rather tight little conservative, tweeds, and then you go into this amazing, incredible freedom of thought and interesting. So that was part of the fun of it, but it is, you do have a script to follow and a story to follow. And of course, he cut it much quicker. I was sort of slightly shocked when I first saw it, which I have to say, I saw it on this laptop in my flat in Prague with a link, 24-hour link from Disney, and not the right leads to put it into my nice big telly. But, so I had to watch it on this with my name plastered across the middle. Not the ideal way to see a film made for the big screen. So the first time I actually saw it for real was my stepson and the family. We all went to see it at the Electric Cinema Club in Portobello about, I suppose, 3 or 4 weeks ago. And that was literally the first time I'd seen it, because we didn't have a cast and crew. There was nothing like that.
Yeah, because of COVID.
And so normally it's wonderful. You see it in some great big cinema in the West End, and everybody gets together for a drink after and discusses it all. None of that happens. So I think we all paid to see it. But the first time I really saw it was... And I've seen it once since on my own not-so-big television in England, on the Disney Channel or whatever, because somebody I knew wanted to see it. But I was sort of shocked by the speed. So the first time I saw it was too quick, and it was on this little 13-inch laptop, that we all have. And the second time was in a lovely cinema. But I was completely shocked at the speed of which you whipped through, the stuff that we'd taken forever. I mean, it couldn't have gone any slower, of course, but it was like, what is that all you see of it? Bloody hell,
Spoken like a true production designer.
Yeah, I think Fiona felt just the same. But I mean, there's some, glorious sets, but it was fascinating. But what was so good, I thought, was the way the story came out, because he really, I think, nailed what's a tricky story. There's sort of debate, especially amongst my friends, that they love the film, but the story is a bit. But I just thought it was great, actually, and really hung together and really kept my attention. And it was so long since we made it. I was watching it in a much fresher way than I would if you had a normal passage of time between finishing a film and seeing it for the first time. So that was quite interesting, because I'd sort of forgotten I'd done 3 films since Cruella, and I'm now on a 4th. So, my mind's been elsewhere.
Sure. Well, I would ask you, I think about movies like Fury Road and Cruella. You have Craig Gillespie, of course, directing Cruella, and then George Miller directing Fury Road. In a way, I mean, I consider both films sort of fantasy films, and I mean, obviously, the world of Immortan Joe and everything that you have in Fury Road, like characters like the Doof Warrior who's spitting fire out of his guitar, and all of these characters, and then all the whole realm. I mean, to me, the clothes of Cruella are so fantastical in a way. How is your relationship with the director on movies like this? Because obviously you're not trying to be evocative necessarily of a period, even though Cruella comes out of the 70s. I mean, you could be on an alien planet wearing, and royalty would be wearing those things. And of course, in the post-apocalyptic wasteland of Fury Road, it's your clothes have to reflect an entire world. And I think the same is true of Cruella. How is your relationship with the director on those films, and how do you have fittings and showings for the director, and how does that work?
Well, much easier these days with obviously the internet and instant photographs, so you can send things to people and they pick them up on their iPhone. So with both are very, very involved with the look. I mean, George particularly, I would say, he is what I would call an auteur in the real sense of the word. He has thought, I mean, he's written it, it's his film. So the look is terribly important to him. And sometimes he knows what he wants. Sometimes he's actually curious he doesn't know. But it's to him what things look like. So we show him all the time. Again, he actually really can't always see it in its... So I often do diagrams against the mood boards. I get someone to just draw a sketch with almost a diagram of what the clothes will be like, and then you see, the thoughts with textures and patterns and colours, and, it'd be like this, but actually it'll be dungarees rather than whatever. So we then work normally with him with sketch artists who can do a very fine, polished-looking rendering that he really gets, which is great. Craig, also very visual, very involved, really knew what he did and didn't like, but also appreciated I didn't have a lot of time, and that sometimes, if I liked it, we were all going to have to like it, but was extremely generous in that. But with all directors, I just send them photographs. And now, with it all being so easy, I do the photographs on my iPhone. Mm-hmm. I can often, within 5 minutes of finishing the fitting, I just want to choose, my favourite looks, and obviously you take a ton of photographs. Sometimes I do download them and have a really good look at them, but basically I'm sending them off pretty immediately to get the reaction, because we never have much time, except Furiosa we do. We're not shooting till next year, but there's a whole story behind why we started so early on that. But yeah, it's absolutely vital that everybody knows everything, so there are no surprises on the day.
Sure.
Often I also, the guide, like I said, we did a sort of plot of her clothes. I would give that to the director, Gore Verbinski, on Cure for Wellness. We basically plotted what everybody was wearing down to which socks they were wearing before, because that's the way he liked to work. And they're all different, of course, but absolutely show them and bore them with stuff, but make sure they really, really know what you're offering.
Well, to me, it's interesting when you work with like George Miller and you're returning back to that world, and how a director works and what they want. I mean, you just mentioned you have a lot of lead time, which you don't usually have on films. You have a lot of lead time to come up with these things. Have you ever, like on something like Furiosa, have you ever gone down the wrong direction that maybe you realize, like, this isn't quite right, I want to start again? Or has that... What's that like when you realize maybe this isn't the way we want to go?
We've got one character which none of us really know what he should look like. He's a new character, and he could look like anything, but of course the strictures of the wasteland and what they have and haven't got, and his role in it, and the kind of guy he is, and all the rest of it. And George's dictum on this one is to keep it simple. But he always likes to say keep it simple, and then we completely over-decorate. But, so, yes, I've done several false starts on him. But I don't worry about that, because we have plenty of time, and it's just important to do it in the end. And you look at it and think, could work, maybe not. But then often the way to do it, if you're not sure, is make or find options that you feel really could work. Don't ever offer anything you don't feel would work. And then try it on the actor. Or if you can't get the actor, try it on, a hapless passerby of the same stature, a fit model or something. I always work on stands. I never, ever do anything flat. So I've got 3 stands in my sitting room, because at the moment we're working in my sitting room, which at the moment I've tidied up for this and for tomorrow morning, because I'm also doing another publicity thing tomorrow. But normally you can hardly see it. It's like a student encampment in here, because we're working here, just me and my assistant Lauren Rohani, and they're all in Chilora, some suburb in Sydney, with a workroom. But this is the new normal. You've just got to get used to it.
Right. I mean, it's interesting the way this modern technology has allowed, especially filmmaking, when before it was so difficult, but now... the first time I covered as a documentarian the making of Lord of the Rings, and they were using video conferencing 21 years ago to talk to people all over the world. And it was unbelievable to watch this sort of new technology being employed. And now I think COVID has certainly accelerated. It's become the new normal to be able to utilize this. But for filmmaking, it's astonishing. All of this communications technology. And like you said, you're able to take pictures of costumes immediately. You don't have to wait for something to be developed. You can send it to a director and ask for a response right away, which has to make your job much easier.
We used to run down to Snappy Snaps, and get 2 copies of it, which, always took about 2 hours at the quickest. Bring it back, have a look, and then literally post them, snail mail off to wherever. No, that's brilliant. And I did a lot of fittings via Zoom. I've done a film in Budapest recently that's actually set in London and Paris. And they managed to cast a lot of actors in Paris 5 days before quarantine came in, so there was no way I could go to them or they could come to me for fittings. So I got a wonderful assistant in Paris to do the fittings, which we either did via Zoom or she fitted them to my instruction and mood boards and thoughts, and then she'd send me the photographs. And that worked a treat. So they actually arrived in Budapest with a costume. I'd then refit them, sometimes using exactly what Corinne had put them in, and sometimes totally change it. But they came with something, and then we did it again in Prague. It was a film set in France, so Corinne was in Paris sending me stuff for our French school children and all the French stuff we needed. And it's just become, but you have to trust the people and you have to give them really clear thoughts as to what you want, and if you get the right people in the right places, it actually works rather well. I can just sit here and I'll have 5 of those. Like, great, thank you. All sizes, please. Have you got any berets to go with them? Whatever. It can almost make one's life easier. But you're taking a gamble, taking a risk.
Of course. Now I have to ask. You said I found it fascinating that you said you didn't know much about fashion, like it wasn't something you were particularly involved in, and yet in Cruella you had to come up with whole lines, fashion lines of clothing, and 2 fashion lines. And I was wondering, in the process of doing that, was that something that was hard to do? Did you actually have to go consult with, you brought up Alexander McQueen when you said McQueen. Obviously I'm not a paragon of fashion myself. If I could, I'd have to lose a lot of weight, but I'd love to wear Tom Ford for the rest of my life. But what was it like for you to create fashion lines for the movie, which I would imagine you'd have to have the history of the fashion line, the philosophy behind the fashion line. So that was something else you had to come up with, which is story driven. So how did that work?
The first one, the 18th century ball, where you see the models going around the catwalk. So it's the Baroness's collection. It's an 18th century themed ball. So it's probable that the line, and it's sort of summer, it's not a winter thing. So you pretty much know that then that's sort of what she'll do. And what she looks like, and her aesthetic. So that lot together. And again, with very clever cutters and giving them some interesting thoughts. And somebody else was Jeff, one of our key people in the workroom, was sort of masterminding it with Sally Turner. That it sort of, that wasn't terribly difficult. All got a bit last minute because I didn't cast the models till rather last minute, but I thought it looked great. The second one was much more tricky. The Cruella one, which you hardly see, because in truth that scene is all about a Dalmatian coat and the Baroness saying she killed my dogs. Spoiler. But in a way, I did that about 8 times. I thought I really hit it. I thought about her. It's got to be totally opposite to the Baroness. It's got to be funky and punky and modern. And I think what happened was, probably, I wouldn't want to be quoted totally on this, but I think Disney possibly saw it as an opportunity to merchandise, but what I was coming up with wasn't, it was, I have no idea. And I think Craig had problems with it, but also I think he might have been being given a hard time. Again, I have no evidence for this, but it certainly turned into a bit of a nightmare. And I think in the end, we ended up with something that was great. And then, of course, we shoot it in November, outside in Greenwich, with a fountain that's actually working, and all the hapless dancers got wet. So the clothes looked pretty bedraggled, but there was nothing I could do about that.
Right.
Thermia became our main, thing that night. But I still look back, and funny enough, I was just looking, because I now got an Instagram account, which is really quite exciting. I've never done social media at all, but I'm really having fun with it. People seem to like the Cruella stuff. So I was looking back at my photos and other stuff I've got, and I realised actually I think there was some really funky, punky, Westwoody, looks in all the stuff I did create. And I did it all on a couple of wonderful dancers who just came in, and we dressed them up, spent a whole afternoon just dressing them up and photographing them. And then, if we add this, it's the same process. Emma Stone or a dancer, it's the same. And in the end, we must have done them. We did so many variants. I could do you a whole fashion line that Cruella herself could have done.
Sure.
But you don't see it. It got wet. And you do see her Dalmatian coat, so, it doesn't matter. But yes, it was quite tough.
I mean, I can only imagine. Now, in terms of difficulty, I can't imagine. I mean, watching Cruella, you can't. I've never seen a movie where I thought about the costume department more. I mean, sure, there's been movies that probably had more extras, and you think about, my God, how do they dress all these people? But in terms of, I so enjoyed watching the film just to see what the next costume was going to be, and I can't remember the last time that happened. I'm like, wow, this is. It's like watching, say, a science fiction film, and you're waiting for the next big special effects sequence. But in Cruella, well, that's actually another question I wanted to ask you. There's the great moment where the flames happen and the dress transforms. Did you interface with the visual effects team in order to make that possible? And how did that work?
Well, we did, absolutely. I mean, I wanted to make sure that there was a way that could be possible, but of course we weren't going to do it. And you can get firewire. And so there is a way of feeding firewire into the fabric, and you can does that. So in truth, we knew it could happen. And we did try some way you could almost see the wires in the white. But in the end, it was a pure visual effect. And I thought well done, because lots of people have asked me if it was for real, and I can say no. But we had excellent visual effects. I mean, brilliant. So, they then did it. But it was a simple white cloak, which we made, and then they did the rest.
I mean, it was a great moment. I think that moment was in the trailer, and I was like, wow, that's cool. And I was curious. I mean, obviously, I was thinking it has to be working with the visual effects team, but visual effects sometimes can be precise, and they might ask you, well, can you change the color just a little bit?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they didn't, but as far as I know, because sometimes I don't know all the ins and outs that go on with the, but I don't think they did, and I think. I mean, always we'd talk to them about blues and greens and what they want as background, and therefore what should we avoid, what can we do, but that should be the way filmmaking is. It's teamwork.
Right.
The whole. So, and normally I get on really well with visual effects. They're great.
Yeah, no, and obviously there was a lot of that. There's a lot of set extensions and things. There was Cruella's first of all stunning. Just a stunning looking movie. It's so much fun to watch from a visual standpoint, and everybody that really, I was asking you earlier about the synergy between all the different departments, between the art department, between costumes. I mean, everything just worked like gangbusters. I'm curious, that's another thing I wanted to ask. Like, I have a book, for instance, of production artwork that was done for Fury Road in advance of the movie being made. So, and I was curious also with Cruella, did you have a lot of pre-production artwork, whether it was paintings, whether it was drawings that was done before you got on these projects? I mean, Fury Road had almost 2 decades of development before it was made. So I'm sure that there was a lot of designs that you were able to avail yourself up and look where a lot of movies wouldn't have something like that. And I would imagine Cruella might have the same kind of thing. Was that something that you had on those projects?
Oh, I think they came on very late. I think the whole thing with Cruella was, I've done 3 Disneys before, or at least 2, Christopher Robin and Nutcracker. Each one, everyone was going straight on to Cruella. And it was never my film. I never thought I'd be doing it because it's not, 70s and fashion isn't my natural media. And there was another designer who was always supposed to do it. And then when it did come up, suddenly they got a window of opportunity with Emma Stone. And so they went for it very, very late. And I don't think Fiona was brought on late, but a little before me. But, I mean, she had to rush, scramble and bollock to, and so we were all sort of, but luckily they were upstairs, so you could run up and see what they were thinking of in terms of, photographs and locations and colour schemes. But it certainly wasn't like Fury Road, where we had a graphic novel to follow.
Right.
Brendan literally written a graphic novel. There were images, whether we didn't actually follow all of them, but some of them we did. And Norma Morrisseau had started it 10 years before, 3 years before. I mean, they'd been trying to make, as you said, Fury Road forever. And so there was a lot of stuff, but it was a very different look that I then, on Fury Road, it was much more S&M, and I wanted to get away from that and make it more of its time and gutsier and just different. But there was lots of bits we absolutely adhered to and that were Norma's or George's or Brendan McCarthy's, and just tried to then pull the whole thing together. And we added, I mean, quite a few of the characters are definitely what I did, but a lot of it, again, you never do I mean, no costume designer will design every single costume in a movie. I mean,
Sure.
Always huge. And like all my wonderful extras in Cruella were sourced and then fitted by another amazing team. Yes, I went in and looked at the colours, and if there was something I didn't like, we'd pull it. Or sometimes I went into the costume houses and said, and they'd line up the racks, and I'd say, well, that looks absolutely brilliant, but actually, I think that's a bit strong, that orange, or the blue is a bit Maggie Thatcher, or whatever, and then you adjust. But so much of what they did, again, you give them good parameters, you give them good examples, if you set it up right, then you get the best out of the people who work for you.
Now, do you ever go beyond, like, from a story standpoint, like, for instance, on something like Fury Road and now Furiosa, do you ever go back and say, okay, we've got the progression of a world? If you look at Mad Max and Mad Max 2 or The Road Warrior and Beyond Thunderdome, and then you get to Fury Road, and do you sit there and extrapolate, like, okay, so here's what happened to the world? And so before you even start designing in your own minds, you have to come up with what was the progression of what actually happened in the world. So where would they get fabrics? Where would they get metal? How would this work? Do you ever have to come up with that in sort of your own backstory that you give to these characters, and your design team does that?
I spend more time making up backstories than I probably do actually putting clothes. I mean, I love the backstory. I think all through, I can tell you anything. I have to have the story straight in my head, or I don't know where I'm going. So I have backstories for everybody and what happened to them and why they're wearing. So actually in Fury Road, all the weird stuff they wear is because they're trying to keep alive. A lot of it is breathing apparatus. And then people like Organic Mechanic has to wear, they haven't got anywhere to keep anything, so they've got to wear it, have it in some sensible place where it's easily available, So it's all got a reason, and therefore I feel it's not just decorative. It happens to be decorative because it's interesting looking, but it's not superfluous. There's a reason for pretty much everything, which I think makes it different from the more superhero-y type things where there's a whole different ethic about, or aesthetic about what and why they wear what they wear. But in Fury Road and the George films, he loves to know where it came from. I love the garden fork in front of Tom's face, because there's no use to having a garden fork anymore. I mean, what would you do with it? So it makes a brilliant muzzle, and he could see where it came from. He loves the simplicity of something like that. So it's very Yeah, but yes, backstories and the reasons. It doesn't matter what it is. It's the same if I'm doing Cranford or Sense and Sensibility. You've got to know the status of the people, where they've got. Cranford, which is a lovely television series with some of the greatest English actresses in, Dame Judi Dench and Eileen Atkins and all that lot. They're incredibly poor, but they're Amazons of this village, women who just are survivors and really strong, but have no money. Well, we had the smallest budget you've ever seen in your life, so thank God. They only have a couple of frocks each, but we change it with the accessories, exactly as they would have done, but because that's the truth, and you're showing the truth, then I think, if it makes sense, then an audience doesn't even worry about it. They just get on with it.
But I think
they're not bothered.
No, but I think what you're doing, what you're talking about is, again, you're telling a story. Like the costume design team, the same way that production design. I mean, I came myself, my first job in the industry was in the art department on a horror film. And the thought that was put in, I was amazed, the thought that was put in to all of these things. Like, people are like, well, the reason they have this piece of tool is because of this, and it came, and like you said, that's why I was asking you about the backstory, because one of the things, like, you look at Fury Road, every single part of the frame in that movie, especially in the beginning when you're seeing the milieu and all where Morton Joe and his people live, there's nothing in the frame that isn't telling you the story. There's something, it's got such a rich backstory for everything. And like you said, hearing you talk about, well, they didn't have lots of pockets. They're wearing their tools. I mean, and what Tom Hardy was wearing at the front of when he's put on the front of the car, like, you feel it. And I think an audience feels that as you watch, and you realize, my God, there is so much in this world. I mean, that's what I love is when you're an individual and you walk into someone's house. I mean, I always find myself looking around, like, all of the details tell me so much about a person. Like, I always look at what books are on the shelves. Do they have movies? Do they have a collection of music? What are the pictures? Because all of that is the story of their lives. You're getting insight into that person. And when you watch a film and you see, like you just said about these frocks, but you change the accessories because these poor women still were strong, confident women that were having to convey strength through the way they looked. Well, that's something that you might not be consciously aware of. But as a viewer in a film, that's part of the reason you get so absorbed in these worlds. I mean, I remember, like, A Cure for Wellness, when you get to the what do you call it? The institute, or the place. Where, I mean, everything in that place. I mean, the design on that film, you go from this corporate boardroom up into the mountains to this crazy facility, and there was nothing in it that wasn't telling a story, and you get absorbed in it. And to know that that's part of your process, I mean, that's obviously why you're so good at what you do, is because I don't even think the director sometimes knows how much thought you're putting into these things, but they can feel it, I would imagine.
I hope that I do feel I am a good storyteller, and I'm very lucky to have amazing people I work with who can then make my vision, come true. But I think I'm pretty good at finding the narrative line and the through thought process and focusing on what will and won't help tell that story. And also, when you do the fitting, it's in the fitting of actually putting the clothes on the actor that you really learn where you're going, and they start to normally react in them and feel right in them, and you can see it. Obviously, we tend to do our principal actors without the hair and makeup there, whereas the crowd fittings are always done. They do the fitting and then they go off to hair and makeup, so by the time they have a photograph taken, they're complete. Our lot are never like that, so it's always then we move on, and but still I'm kind of used to that after how many years. But it is absolutely in the fittings that you really learn what will happen. That does, as you get older and more experienced, you hit it more quickly. But and that's exactly what I hope will happen, that the audience will feel it, but without being distracted by it.
Sure.
Normally in what Yes, Cruella was about fashion, so yes, I hope everyone is looking at the clothes. But normally, what I do, I hope I'm just providing the support. All those merchant ivories, they happen to be set in very interesting costume periods. The Edwardians were hugely flamboyant in their hats, particularly, and so yes, of course they look like that. But it should look real.
Right. I mean, that's my favorite word is verisimilitude. Creating the reality within the proscenium of that frame. And, that's a hard thing to do. Every single camera shot has to provide, nothing cannot look real in every single scene. One small detail can betray that reality that's being created. Was Cruella the hardest project you've had to work on? Was it the most difficult, or maybe it was something I wouldn't even consider? What do you think was the most difficult film that you've worked on to pull off?
I mean, Cruella was very difficult, yes. Cure for Wellness was pretty difficult because it was just trying to find really what was in Gore's mind. But again, Eve Stewart, the production designer, was absolutely brilliant. I mean, I thought her work was incredible, and that really helped me find my looks, which are so simple, but sometimes that's quite hard to do. So that was a real toughie. Alexander, because again, we did it at such short notice, and I didn't know much about the ancient Greeks and thought they were more complicated, but thank God they wear a simple wrap of cloth, bomb with a couple of pins, and, Bob's your uncle, if you get the right cloth. Anna and the King was massive, but I mean, Cruella, yeah, it was really tough, but we did have a reasonable budget. There was, people really understood it had to, and we were doing it at such speed, we had to be allowed to spend money. And I do spend wisely. I'm as I said, a war baby, not quite, but just sort of, I don't like wasting money. So, but it was wonderful to just know you could have the crew you needed and the fabric you needed and enough people to make it. So that was a blessing. That really was a blessing.
I actually own multiple versions of Alexander because Oliver Stone has recut the movie and keeps putting out different. Well, I think he's done now, but
yeah.
I'm actually quite fond of that movie, and that had to have been fun to work on. But now to sort of wrap up, I mean, this has been such a fantastic discussion. I can't thank you enough. I've learned so much from you. What would you tell somebody? We always ask this question. Obviously, now we live in that post-social media era. And like you said, you're having fun on Instagram. You have people and influencers sharing designs and all over the world instantaneously. So anybody that can become a fashion designer has all of these tools now they can avail themselves of. What advice would you give to somebody that wants to start out as a stylist, a costume designer? Where do they begin? And what kind of training? I know asking you've told us how you kind of fell into it, but you must now, you've worked with so many people over the course of your illustrious career. What advice might you impart to somebody who wants to get into this crazy field?
I think there are some wonderful courses. I don't know so much in America what there is, but certainly in England we have quite a lot of excellent costume courses for design and making in many art schools. So that, I think, is a really good way of doing it. And a lot of them also then, they're very good at putting the young students on production. So I know Harry Potter had a lot of people went and worked on Harry Potter. And we try and take trainees and as and when we possibly can. We certainly had a lot on Cruella. So that's a sort of starting point. I would say do not assume you're going to do it from the word go. I think it's terribly important to have a go at everything, because it also may be that there's another world out there like breakdown, dyeing, textile art. It could be fitting. It could be, doing putting crowds together. There are people who are superb at it, like Joe Koblevsky, who did Cruella, and Tim Aslam, who did Doolittle and loads of stuff, King's Speech with me. And that's a very, very creative art. There's buying, which is hard work, but you get into the mind of a design. So there's a lot of other things, and you must try and get in on a small film and do everything to help. If they need help with locations or accommodation or food or finding portaloos. You know, at the moment, my daughter's working on a small film, and she's been helping on she's actually director's assistant, but she's been on doing every other thing as well. So you learn the whole industry. Really good to know how the whole thing works. And then when you do get offered something, take a deep breath. Deep breathing is very important, but approach it in bite-sized chunks. So read the script, really learn your script, really listen to the director. Do not, and try not to put yourself in there. Storytell. I mean, I try not to put I don't want it to, as I said before, look like a Jenny Beavan product. I just want to do what's right for the film. But don't have an overall vision, but then go in schedule order and focus on parts. It's like when your bedroom's in a shocking mess. Don't panic about the whole thing. Just do one drawer and then maybe another drawer. You know, and then pretty soon it'll be done, but you won't have stressed. Because the minute you stress, you seize up and the ideas won't come. And also, I find my best ideas often come when I'm in the supermarket, in the bath, in the garden, just walking, you know, and let your mind go free. So you do all this research and you can't think. Go and do something else. It's like doing a crossword. When you get stuck, go and put it away, and then you come back and it's obvious what that word should be. Do you know what I mean? I think that's something that I would tell any young designer, but get experience in all on set, look after actors, make the tea, you know, learn the continuity book, take the photos, do whatever. Laundry, always very important.
Well, listen, I mean, this conversation's been amazing. I could talk to you for hours, but I know you probably can't sit there and talk to me for hours, but I'd love to know, you talked about Furiosa, but you've got a lot of films you've already done that are in the can. You've got some that are in pre-production. What are some of your upcoming projects? Can you mention them, and when can we hope to see them?
So there's a lovely little film about Alexander Pope with Simon Callow, which is very small and probably will end up on BBC television or something like that, which we did the first thing that when COVID, you know, we were allowed to go out and work again. Second one is Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris with Leslie Manville. Absolutely brilliant. A 50s cleaner who sees a Dior frock in her client's wardrobe and just wants it. It's utterly charming, and Leslie is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I've just done White Bird in Prague, which is part of the Wonder series, the little boy in the film called Wonder. So there's a link to Wonder. I don't know if you remember it with Julia Roberts as the mother, but it's a completely different story. It's like his, the boy who bullies his grandmother's story. So there is a link. And that was set in the 40s in rural France. We shot it in Czech Republic. And then I came back and I'm doing this Furiosa, which I've been doing because we were going to have to pre-shoot to do with a Australian tax exemption.
Of course.
And then suddenly it's rules, so we didn't have to, but we were prepping it from Prague, you know, like, oh my God. And it was going to have new principals who would be on Stump People and more. And then suddenly we didn't have to, but we were already on a rhythm. And obviously to hold the crew in Australia, because they're doing so much, it was really important to just like keep the workroom going. So
right.
Brilliantly decided to let us, and it's massive, so we do need a massive workroom down there or a lot of people making a lot of stuff. So
now, when do you leave for Sydney?
It goes well in January, and I come back in August, I think, September.
Well, that's going to be amazing.
Well, yes, I mean, I've been a few times, but never for very long. And but I was so pleased when I saw the crew list. It's all so many of the same people from Fury Road. It's great.
Now, you said you were having fun on Instagram. Where can people follow you on social media?
Okay, I now have Jenny Beavan Design.
Oh, is that your handle on Instagram?
Jenny Beavan Design, just that. My name spelt right, design, and it's just normal. And the Guild. I mean, I'm not a member of the Guild because I don't live or work in Los Angeles, but they're incredibly me. And Sal Perez said, you really should be on Instagram. It's a really powerful tool, And I thought, well, actually, what's lovely about it is I can celebrate all the people who work for me. So I haven't done a lot yet. And sometimes I put up I've done the cat, and I've done my family a little bit. And, but I'm doing a lot, obviously, on Cruella, because I'm trying to point out I've still got lots of people to celebrate. But I did today. We put up the crowds. Have a look. I've only got about 20 posts so far. It's very new.
Oh, I'm going to go out on social media today, and I'm going to tell everybody to follow you on Insta. So we'll make sure that you have Jenny Beavan, the Academy Award winning. All I have to say, because I cater to not just the Designing Hollywood podcast, but my podcast skews toward science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I call them imagination connoisseurs, and they would love to follow you.
It's going quite well, I have to say, and I am enjoying it. What happens is that I've been quite busy, so finding the photographs and finding a theme for it, and then because my sister squares the photographs and my daughter posts them, because I'm not very good at all. So you send it off to them with the caption or what you want to say, and then you find and they've just put it up. It's up, Mum, it's up, and then you find the perfect photograph you did put up, and you think, and it does take time.
Right.
But I thought I don't do it every day, but you should try and go for it a bit, and then I can calm down. But I have to say, it is fun. And I've been on Instagram, but as a stalker. So I could see my sister's amazing live drawings, my neighbour's incredible live drawings and photographs, my cousin Rod's wonderful woodblock prints, and all the people who do put it and wouldn't send me an email with it. So if I want to see what they were up to, and I do have a very artistic set of family and friends who do put really, really good stuff, and it seems a nice one. I'm always terribly wary of social media, but it actually seems a good and obviously very visual one. So anyway, there I am.
Well, listen, as a fan, I mean, I'd love to see things like showing us the evolution of the work that you've done in the past. I mean, obviously, not just the genre stuff like you did, whether it's Sherlock Holmes or Cure for Wellness, but even going all the way back to the work you did for BBC television in the early 80s. If you had any of that kind of material, I think a lot of people are really interested in the process of film, and if you're really gonna go out on social media, you can make it your Instagram feed would be a destination spot for people that are interested in filmmaking and people that are interested in costume design. So, you might end up being an Insta star, going back in and just you've got such a great body of work to share the process with, not just obviously the topical stuff, but people are gonna. I mean, Cruella, obviously, sure. And of course, obviously, you can't show anything from Furiosa until it comes out. But going back, I mean, you've done so much. I'd love to see the costume design work you did with Alexander and just all that stuff. I mean, you must have an incredible backlog of stuff to show.
Well, what I did was I actually gave a lot to the BFI because it got too much to have in the house. I mean,
Sure.
I was just over. In the old days, you had about 8 files, and God knows how many sort of bits and bobs and stuff, and I just was overwhelmed. So I put it all in bags. It went off, and BFI have been brilliant. They're cataloguing it. If I need to get at it, I can, but they're up in Berkhamsted or somewhere, out of London. So it would be a trip.
Sure.
A
But if
lot
you
of
have
the
it.
stuff. Do realise I come from pre-Polaroid. So in the old days, I mean, we didn't have photographs or stuff. It was all just done by little drawings on the script. I mean, with about 4, Room with a View there were 4 of us. Sally Turner ran the set, William Pearce and I, dressed and undressed, all the crowds in Italy with Elena Politi. I was pregnant, I could hardly bend, and thank God Italians are vain and keep themselves looking decent during the day. How we did it and didn't die. The end of the day, 100 hot Italians, desperate to get out of their costumes, would descend on our little base, and it was sort of, we had to have someone holding them back at the door so we could actually get the costume back on the rack with the relevant number for tomorrow. I mean, I come from another era, so I don't have a lot of stuff from that time. I can find it on the internet, like anyone else can. of. But it's really relatively recent that we've got these tons and tons. I mean, I've got 60,000 photographs just, and that's not what's on the hard drive, you know.
Right.
So I think in my old-fashioned plan chest drawers up in my studio room, I might well have some drawings and things, but I would literally have to scan them, photograph them, which I can do on my iPhone. But, you know, and so I haven't quite, you know, it's, yes, I need to really stop work and then make this a kind of life endeavour. But at the moment, I'm just getting my feeling and doing a lot of, as much as I can of Cruella because it's current. But yes,
yeah,
I will past and some fun. Oh, I have found a hilarious photograph, a picture of one of my only ever costume drawings, which is the children in Anna and the King.
Oh, yeah, I mean, all that stuff. Put it up. Well, Jenny Beavan, I want to thank you for being here as part of the Designing Hollywood podcast. What a delightful conversation we've had, and I feel so honored to have this conversation with you, and I can't wait to see what you have in store for us. I mean, obviously, Cruella was a triumph. I'm sure at awards season it'll be taken into consideration again. I would expect to see another nomination, if not a win, and I think anybody who knows me, I have a lifelong relationship with the Mad Max movies. So to say that I'm excited for Furiosa is a gross understatement, because man, I loved Fury Road, and I think I saw it 8 times in the theater. My current girlfriend hadn't seen it, and it was right before awards consideration. It just showed up at our big theater. They were showing awards films here in Hollywood at the Cinerama Dome, and it was like playing for 3 days in the theater. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, wait a minute, Fury Road's it's at the Dome again? Because I had seen it when it came out back in May of, what was it, 2015, and then in the end of December, right after Christmas, it was just in the theater without any fanfare. I'm like, we're going. And I went and saw it again. So, boy, I can't wait for Furiosa.
So no pressure then.
No pressure. But you know what? I think after Fury Road, I don't think anybody needs. The only thing that I can't even imagine is how they could possibly outdo Fury Road. I just can't. I mean, that movie was mind-boggling on every level. So, yeah, no, I guess no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. That's of George Miller. I'm just a cog in the wheel, chugging along, trying to get it right. You know, and provide him with what he needs. But he and Guy Norris, and it won't be John Seal this time, but I don't know who the cameraman is. But you know, oh my God, John Seal did such an astonishing job. It looks so beautiful. Because I did watch it again before this, and as I said in Prague, I had a really beautiful, huge television, so it was a great thing to watch it on. It's on, I don't know, one of these Netflixy type things, and it did look absolutely fabulous. But yeah, no, well, listen, you've asked some great questions. It's really fun to talk about, you know, the work and how I do it. So I've really enjoyed it too.
Well, thank you so much. I very much appreciate you giving of your time, and I'm sure everybody will love hearing your stories. I mean, just amazing and inspirational. So thank you very much. And thank you to our sponsor, the United American Costume Company, established in 1977 by legendary costumer and costume designer Luster Bayless. Luster wanted to form a company independent from the studios that would provide quality wardrobe for affordable prices and never lose sight of the notion that we as costumers are filmmakers. Follow me, your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, on Twitter at BurnettRM, on Instagram at Robert Meyer Burnett, and on my own YouTube channel, The Burnett Work. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in. Until next time.